good to go, Shahana.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I am absolutely delighted that we are launching these 3 reports that are rather significant for Bioenergy Australia, and we're incredibly grateful to those that have produced those reports on our behalf. I will kick off by, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I am, which is the Ngunnawal people here in Canberra. I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. I would also like to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who may be on this call, but also all of those different areas where people are joining from as well. So as I said, we're launching 3 big reports today that have been sort of 12 months in the making. And I would really like to thank GHD and Helmont Energy for producing these reports and for being incredibly patient and flexible with us in the production of these reports. I am not going to be talking for too long. My role is to really say hi to everyone and welcome you all. The purpose, I suppose, of these 3 particular reports was to really provide a pointing place for us in relation to ensuring that bioenergy is considered in future policy making into the future around circular economy approaches, also injection of renewable gas into the gas pipeline network here in Australia, but then also looking at monetisation of digestate and making sure that we're creating an opportunity and a place for digestate to actually be able to thrive in Australia and to be recognised. And so we saw these three separate reports as having a really fantastic opportunity for us to use in the work that we're doing and informing investors, informing policymakers, and the like here in Australia in relation to us progressing, particularly the circular economy approach here. So the 3 reports that we have are Turning Circle, How Bioenergy Can Supercharge Australia's Circular Economy, prepared by GHD. We have Fertile Ground, The Role of Digestate in Australia's Circular Economy, also prepared by GHD. And we have the Biomethane Gas Injection Report, prepared by Helmont Energy. Tiania Nan from LMS will be our moderator and managing this session, and she is the policy manager as well from LMS Energy. But more importantly for me, she is the chair of our Renewable Gas Alliance at Bioenergy Australia, which is really where so much of the grunt work that we're doing around accelerating the opportunity for biomethane in Australia in particular. So just to give you a little bit of the operations of today, if anyone can be popping any questions into the Q&A as the sessions are going along, and Tiana will look after all of those at the end of the session. So very much looking forward to hearing the session today. Thank you so much, everyone, once again for the production of the reports. A very big thank you to Lauren for pulling all of this together for us, and very much looking forward to hearing everything. So thanks so much. Over to you, Tiania.
Thank you, Shahana. So welcome everyone to today. I am the very new chair of the Renewable Gas Alliance, and I have been part of the committee for a bit over a year now. And the Renewable Gas Alliance is one of several committees that Bioenergy Australia has to really advocate for the change we need to build in our sector. And the membership is diverse across researchers, producers of all different forms of biogas, industry and gas users. The purpose of the group is to assist in driving a higher level of understanding, uptake and engagement relating to the renewable gas opportunities in Australia. And whilst we acknowledge there are other forms of renewable gas available, the current focus of the Alliance is on biomethane and really building this opportunity. We're actively engaging with the federal government as well as a number of the state governments about the opportunities that are presented through bioenergy and biogas, and the policy needs that we need to see taken up to drive the growth of this industry. And the reports today become a really important factor in that, of helping share the multiple elements that make up our industry and the multiple benefits that they can bring. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers. Martin Gravitt is the Technical Director of Resource Recovery and Waste Management with GHD. He has 30 years experience in resource recovery and waste management, in project development and delivery, as well as technology development and process optimisation. He's led future-focused initiatives around waste and organics recycling, infrastructure, market opportunity assessment, bioenergy and bulk waste handling logistics. He's presenting on the Turning Circle report, and then will be followed by Alistair Green, who is the Senior Process Engineer of Wastewater and Organic Waste to Energy at GHD. Alistair has 15 years experience in the water industry, as well as experience in organic waste to energy projects across the full life cycle, from feasibility and concept development to detailed design, construction and commissioning. And then Mark Yonker is the Founding Director at Helmont Energy. Mark has over 20 years of experience developing bioenergy and power projects. He's held numerous executive positions across the energy market, including being responsible for global growth and the commercialisation of new renewable energy technologies from EDL. Mark has extensive experience as a business and project developer, and has also project managed renewable and remote power projects in Australia, North America, the UK and Europe. In 2020, Helmont Energy was founded, and Helmont is actively developing bioenergy projects which support the Australian agricultural industry and remote and regional communities. So I will be pleased our speakers will present on the reports in turn. As Shahana said, please write your questions into the Q&A, and we will then have a 25-minute Q&A panel session following on from the three speakers who will hand to each other in turn. So I'd now like to welcome Martin to commence his presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tiana. Just try and get my share up. Hopefully people can see that. Controls seem to have disappeared. I'm getting a login prompt, Tiana, for some reason.
Lauren, would you be able to assist with that?
Yeah, I can share my screen and show the report.
That sounds like a great idea. Sorry all, I'm not quite sure what you can see at the moment, but we're just working on getting the presentation up. Okay, I can see that, Lauren. It's showing you full window at the moment.
Great, so that's full screen.
It's showing all the create PDF, etc. stuff down the side. It's showing you a whole window, not just the
Sorry
PDF.
about that. I'm back now, I think.
There we go. That's the right view. Thank you. Okay, Martin, let's see how we go.
I'll try again. Now, is that working?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so welcome everyone. We Sorry, it's just not showing up on my screen properly.
It's your purpose slide.
Yes. Okay. So our brief for this project was to explain the role of bioenergy and bioproducts in Australia's transition to a more circular economy. It wasn't a comprehensive research project and technical report. Target audiences are primarily policymakers, larger businesses developing their emission strategies, and the media. We set out to provide background and context, build on the waste hierarchy, viewing it through a circular economy lens, and to explain where bioenergy and bioproducts fit within that. We also explored bioenergy feedstocks and their relevance to circular economy and energy markets in Australia, where waste-derived feedstocks fit in, the regulatory limitations we see today and their implications, competitive considerations, and the key factors driving costs and viability in transitioning from reliance on fossil fuels to renewables, including bioenergy. We also sought to explain simply the complexities of bioenergy in the broader renewable energy and materials recycling landscapes, the benefits of bioenergy and their associated bioproducts, the economic gains from growing the bioenergy sector, self-sufficiency and resilience, and carbon emission reductions, and the catalysts for growth to identify the regulatory support and policy shifts needed to maximise opportunities for bioenergy industry expansion. And to do that, we obviously needed to have a clear process for developing the document and consolidating views. So our process was iterative and consultative, with check-ins, reviews and input from stakeholders, but of course our client, and also ARENA and IEA's Bioenergy Technology Collaboration Program reps from Sweden, Norway and Australia also provided some input or review. We distilled information from Bioenergy Australia's submissions on various government policy consultations, study reports they commissioned and other collateral. And we also sought alignment with key elements of ARENA's Bioenergy Roadmap, noting that was released quite late in our development process. Bioenergy is a renewable source for electricity, heat and gas and transport fuels. And since it's derived from biomass, bioenergy doesn't result in a net increase in atmospheric carbon emissions. However, bioenergy should come from sustainable biomass. And sustainable biomass sources include agricultural and forestry residues, animal manures, meat processing residues, energy crops, wastewater treatment sludges, as well as food and garden organics from households and businesses. Bioenergy circulates the energy of materials that would otherwise go to waste. And being derived from organic materials, it's renewable. It can help us reduce atmospheric emissions, create jobs and replenish essential carbon and nutrients in our soils. Bioenergy is the world's primary source of renewable energy, providing around 1/10 of the world's total primary energy. It's got a long track record of cost-effectively reducing carbon emissions, improving energy productivity, generating reliable baseload energy and growing regional jobs around the world. But these technologies are not yet widely deployed in Australia, contributing less than 1% of our electricity, which is well below the OECD average of 2.4%. So what do we mean by a circular economy? A circular economy seeks to keep materials and energy in use for as long as possible, reducing depletion of natural resources. A circular economy is based on 3 principles, driven by design: eliminate waste and pollution, circulate products and materials at their highest value, and regenerate nature. It's underpinned by a transition to renewable energy and materials, and bioenergy production is based on these principles. It addresses wastage of materials and the impacts of non-biogenic carbon emissions, creating renewable energy. And the waste hierarchy underpins the circular economy model, transitioning from a consumption-based linear economy where we take, make, use and dispose to a more circular model sees the embodied energy and inherent resource value of biomass preserved to the fullest extent practicable. A truly sustainable circular economy is supported by production and use of bioenergy and the manufacturing, use and reuse of bioproducts. By shifting from a consumption-based waste generating model to a circular economy, Australia can move from being one of the highest per capita waste generators and carbon emitters in the world to a recycling and remanufacturing powerhouse. I'm sure you've seen the government's Remade in Australia advertisements, and I'm sure you've also seen numerous documents that have been published highlighting the benefits of doing more to maximise value from sustainable biomass sources and embrace bioenergy and bioproducts. The Australian Bioenergy Roadmap provides some estimates of the potential contribution of sustainable biofuels in the Australian market by 2030, and Australia's 2021 infrastructure plan sets out key elements around Australia's opportunity to reduce waste and avoidable emissions and capitalise on opportunities presented by diverting significant quantities of organic waste from landfill. There's a lot we can do, and there's a lot to consider. The COVID pandemic has really highlighted the importance of and value of doing more with less. We need to consider shorter, more circular and less fragile supply chains that are more resilient. We need to work towards less reliance on global supply chains. The supply chain and material flow graphic we adapted from a 2009 schematic by IEA Bioenergy, and we've updated it to a contemporary Australian context. It shows the steps in the supply chain between feedstock and product and potential for synergies as bioenergy infrastructure networks develop across Australia. There was some debate around inclusion of aggregates and concrete in this schematic, but in the end we kept it in there because from a bioenergy perspective, aggregates and concrete inputs are co-products and or byproducts of energy recovery in the construction and demolition, as well as the commercial and municipal waste subsectors. And so it fits here in the context of supply chain optimization, as aggregates generally require some level of processing, and aggregates also represent the largest component by mass in the C&D waste stream. I won't try and explain what it all means in the limited time today, but the lines between the source of input and aggregation or segregation pathway are essentially a high-level Sankey depiction of relative proportions of material flows between feedstock streams. So that basically means the thickness of the lines represents the proportion of the material flow, at least at a graphical level. The solid lines depict commercially established energy recovery pathways or processes, and the dashed lines are considered developing or not yet commercially established in Australia. The top portion of the schematic shows the scale of opportunity by industry. The bar shading represents supply chain value creation potential. And I won't dwell on this as it takes a bit of time to work through it, and you can review it at your own pace when you read the document. And if you don't entirely agree with it, that's cool, because the document is intended to stimulate discussion around bioenergy and bioproducts uptake. The greater use of bioenergy as part of a renewable energy mix using proven and commercially ready technology has many benefits, including a pathway to net zero carbon emissions, with some of the benefits listed here. In an ideal world, there would be no waste. In a circular economy, waste becomes an input to a manufacturing process. And we need to get better at separating our waste into streams more suitable for processing, and we're getting there. But some examples of making the most of our waste include directing clean organic waste to anaerobic digestion, retaining and cycling the inherent energy and nutrient values of these materials. Digestate from anaerobic digestion can further reduce carbon emissions by building soil carbon and offsetting use of mineral and fossil-derived fertilisers, which are also becoming far more expensive in current economic circumstance and with global disruptions that have been happening. Agricultural residues used for energy recovery and cogeneration, just as biogas is already used in sugar refining, or medium density fiberboard offcuts being used as boiler fuel in new fiberboard manufacturing, post-consumer timber wood chips as boiler fuel in a paper mill, and biomass-rich processed engineered fuel as a lower carbon input in cement manufacturing. There's already a lot of this happening. There could be more happening. Landfill gas exploitation already provides almost a third of Australia's carbon emissions abatement. And state policies preference higher order uses over energy recovery for recyclable materials, but combustion with energy recovery is considered a higher order use for residual waste that would otherwise have ended up in landfill. And the biogenic component of residual waste is considered renewable in Australia. So the government actually considers waste to energy a reliable source of renewable energy when the feedstock is produced using natural resources that can be considered consistently replenished and are non-finite. But it's not all about waste and waste avoidance. Sustainable biomass can include plantation forestry. Biomass can come from energy crops. A range of processes and supply chain considerations come into focus. Logistics are a key factor, and competition with existing energy sources and established distribution networks all impact project economics. So what's in the way? Australia lags other developed countries in the creation of a bioenergy sector. You may ask why we don't already have anaerobic digestion plants, biomass-fired power stations and other bioenergy infrastructure dotted all over the country. That is the case in Europe and other parts of the world. but we've had a lack of consistent government policy support to drive investment. There have been market access challenges due to competition with fossil fuels and their well-established supply chains. We have a risk-averse investment environment within the Australian energy industry. There's been a lack of education of the community and industry on the opportunities and benefits of bioenergy. And there's been a lack of incentives or confidence amongst farmers to participate in bioenergy production. To build a thriving bioenergy sector in Australia, Bioenergy Australia advocates long-term, stable government energy policy supporting decarbonisation, mandated decarbonisation of emission-intensive industry and energy providers, financial support for technology development and development capital, and a culture of learning, education and innovation within state environmental regulators. In the document, we didn't present a detailed assessment of the current status of bioenergy development across Australia, but we did include numerous examples of existing policies and project case studies that show the diverse range of biofuels and bioenergy production project scenarios that could be emulated and replicated across the country. These included Qantas's investment in sustainable aviation biofuels, or SAF, MSM Milling at Manildra switched from LPG-fired boiler to a biomass-fired boiler. Gemina and Sydney Water are currently developing the Malabar Renewable Methane Grid Injection Project, or delivering that, and Richgrove's food waste to biogas plant already operating in Perth. Some of these projects are truly groundbreaking, and others are seeking to establish infrastructure using technologies and processes that are already well established in other parts of the world, but that are only still just emerging here due to a range of factors. The Queensland Government's Biofutures Roadmap and Action Plan from 2016 showcased the potential for bioenergy to grow into a multi-billion-dollar industry, offering long-term jobs and energy supply resilience. And since then, other states have variously set out to develop and implement strategic policy initiatives, action plans, and articulated the need to transition to a more circular economy. But supportive, consistent national policy initiatives and effective coordination and planning are also needed for a sustainable energy transition. We included some headline figures and takeaway messages from ARENA's Bioenergy Roadmap in the document. And with this graphic, we set out to show the supply chain value creation opportunity by industry. And you'll note that biomass is shown in there as effectively an adaptation or a production opportunity. For example, agriculture can produce biomass, and this can be a product, or it can be a byproduct used as an energy source in other industries, or as part of downstream agri-industry processing, as is already the case with bagasse in the sugar industry. Manufacturing can use heat, gas, fuel, or electricity sourced from bioenergy producers, or biomass directly as a replacement fuel in boilers, for example. And likewise with utilities, wastewater treatment and energy production both present energy generation and biomass production or utilisation opportunities. The tyranny of distance and our widely distributed population are often cited as key reasons why many initiatives and processes are already well proven elsewhere in the world and not yet here in Australia. But we have an opportunity to actually use this to our advantage. More resilient supply chains are less dependent on global imports. They thrive on self-sufficiency and circular economy principles. And Australians are actually pretty good at growing things. So sustainable biomass, bioenergy and bioproducts can play a very important role in our sustainable energy and low emissions future. So how does Bioenergy Australia want you to use this document? Bioenergy Australia would like you to draw attention to it when you're discussing a new project with investors, potential supply chain partners or environmental regulators. If you're trying to explain the difference that bioenergy and bioproducts can make to Australia's energy supply security, you may find it useful to reference this document. It's intended to be a conversation starter and to inform discussion around more supportive regulatory policy settings and to provide background for future focused decision making. And it's intended to highlight the potential for bioenergy to supercharge Australia's transition to a more circular economy, building on the National Bioenergy Roadmap released by ARENA at the end of last year. Thank you for that opportunity to present.
Thank you, Martin. That was very interesting. We'll just hand over to Alistair now. And everyone online, if you've got questions you want to ask, please enter them into the Q&A. We've got one sitting here, but we'd like a few more for our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Tian. I'll just go through the rigmarole.
There we go, you're up.
All good?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much. So my name's Alistair Green. As Tiana mentioned, I'm a senior process engineer with GHD, working in wastewater treatment and organic waste to energy. And I'm talking here today, following on from Martin's topic. I'm talking here today more so around the role of digestate in Australia's circular economy, as is presented in a similar document you can see on your screen there. So similar to Martin, the purpose of this piece, and really our brief was with Bioenergy Australia, was to create an eye-catching and an engaging communication piece, explaining digestate and explaining its important role in unlocking investment in anaerobic digestion within Australia's circular economy. It was intended as a sort of a 10-page, I guess, booklet containing ideas and concepts explained clearly and succinctly, to be used as a conversation starter, as Martin mentioned, and to draw awareness to the importance of digestate whenever we're talking about anaerobic digestion. The target audience there was, again, similar to Martin's with respect to policymakers, business, local government, and the media. And in developing the document, we explored feedstock, so anaerobic digestion feedstock, the types and ranges, and the consideration of feedstock in the context of digestate reuse and the management of risks associated with that. We looked at the benefits and present the benefits to digestate reuse in the context of farming, employment, the economy, and the climate. We looked at the regulatory landscape and some of those associated limitations and current challenges, which include some of the constraints around digestate classification and use in Australia and the current policy shift needed. And we looked at catalysts for growth to unlock the potential of anaerobic digestion. What we didn't do was a specific feedstock analysis, a detailed assessment of digestate management processes and products, or a detailed situation analysis. This really was a conversation starter. So linking that back into to Martin's circular economy graphic, and really anaerobic digestion really ties in really well to the circular economy. And as Martin's mentioned, we're sort of only just scratching the surface of bioenergy opportunity in Australia. But anaerobic digestion really does enable the recovery and the use of the embodied energy, nutrient, heat, and carbon values of organic feedstocks, or organic products used as feedstocks to anaerobic digestion. So how does anaerobic digestion work? We've got on the screen here I guess a fairly typical depiction of an anaerobic digestion scheme supply chain, starting on the left-hand side with a broad range of potential feedstocks, including animal residues, agriculture, wastewater sludges, food waste, and other organics from commercial and industrial operations. As we move through the supply chain, there's obviously collection mechanisms, pre-processing to prepare the material and deal with contamination, and then the anaerobic digestion stage. And so it's that anaerobic digestion step in which there's a controlled biological decomposition of the biodegradable material, and in which microorganisms naturally break down the organic matter to create biogas and this nutrient-rich product we call digestate. And I suppose when we talk about anaerobic digestion, I think a lot of the focus sort of goes to the biogas side of the equation, which is dare I say, the more sexy element of anaerobic digestion. So we're really focusing on this piece on the digestate. But just to complete the anaerobic digestion picture, the biogas typically is utilised to provide heating and cooling, heat and electricity through cogeneration, and biomethane or renewable natural gas via biogas upgrading. And we'll hear more about that from Mark, but that really is, I think, the exciting frontier in relation to anaerobic digestion and biogas management in Australia. In relation to digestate, it's a high in available nitrogen. It's got a high organic content, and along with other nutrients and trace elements. And it typically, the characteristics of the digestate will absolutely depend on the feedstock makeup and the anaerobic digestion technology and process employed. But in a general sense, typically the whole digestate or raw digestate straight out of the process is in a slurry form from a traditional wet anaerobic digestion process, which can be used in its raw or whole form in a horticultural or agricultural setting. But probably more typically it goes through a digestate management process and is separated into solid digestate and liquid digestate. And each of those have their own sort of suite of characteristics and qualities. So Martin mentioned the Bioenergy Roadmap and mentioned that in the context of this document or these document developments, it was released late in the development process. But it really talked to anaerobic digestion, and specifically renewable natural gas or biomethane features heavily. And it features in theme 1, which is all about enabling market opportunities in hard to abate sectors. So what's on the screen now is just a few direct grabs from the roadmap, which really go to an appreciation in that document that outside renewable natural gas or biomethane grid injection, there are actually limited low carbon alternatives to reduce emissions from gas consumption. And the roadmap includes really ambitious targets, including a 23% target for total pipeline gas market by the 2030s. So in the absence, that's great, that's awesome. In the absence of a clear pathway to digestate management though, this just won't be achieved. And the roadmap itself calls this out with these couple of references to digestate. So again, it's clear that in order to enable the market opportunities in the hard to abate market or sector of gas, digestate really needs attention. Which is the intent of this piece of work. So the document goes on to present the benefits, the broad-reaching benefits of digestate in an agricultural setting in particular, and separates them into these 3 broad categories. Firstly, the benefits to farming. The first point there is around improving soil condition, and so that's particularly applied to the dewatered or the solid digestate, which is high in organic content, and it really provides those soil condition benefits, including moisture and carbon retention. Readily available nitrogen and other trace elements, which is again specifically or particularly relevant to the raw digestate product or the liquid digestate, and then flowing on from that is the ability or the opportunity for digestate to offset synthetic fertilizer, which is particularly pertinent right now with the cost of mineral or synthetic fertilizers to a farming enterprise. The next category there is around benefits for the economy and employment. And anaerobic digestion is a proven technology, but it employs skilled constructors, skilled operators, and skilled service providers. The opportunities in the regions for these types of projects is huge, given the nature of industrial activity in the regions and benefits, including buffer distances and the like. And we've seen regional job creation as an important feature in driving other established markets around the world, including, or notably Denmark, Germany and the UK. So the last category there is benefits for the climate. And that first one, avoiding harmful emissions, again, goes to that notion of viable digestate outlet being critical to unlocking anaerobic digestion projects. And it's the anaerobic digestion projects which capture and use emissions from organic feedstocks that otherwise would end up in the atmosphere. And then the final one there, which links more directly to the digestate, is the opportunity to substitute digestate material for energy-intensive mineral fertilizer production. This slide here talks to, I guess, a risk-based approach to digestate management, with an understanding that the risk profile of digestate reuse really is impacted by the feedstock and the complexity and characteristics of the feedstock, the processing technology, both the digestion processing and pre-processing technologies put in place, and also the end use itself. And so with a view to these varying risk or varying characteristics, a risk-based approach considering these variables is needed to provide a proportionately applied risk management controls at the back end. In addition to this, or in concert with this, a clear and consistent user guidance and classification as a product rather than a controlled or regulated waste is going to be critical. So that user guidance is around things like application rates and other agronomical considerations. So with clear policy, risk-based regulatory framework and user guidance, end users can be confident that they are applying digestate safely, and they can, in doing so, they can enjoy the extensive nutrient and carbon benefits that go with that. And the graphic on the right-hand side comes from the booklet and really, I guess, quite simply talks to that point in relation to the feedstock profile and the increasing risk profile that goes along with feedstock complexity. So what's in the way? There are a couple of questions there, I guess, on the left-hand side. So what is it? What is digestate? Do we know what it is? Well, we're certainly getting there, and that's another key purpose of this piece of work is to increase and improve that communication. Are there benefits to digestate? There certainly are benefits, and this document seeks to really clearly and concisely outline those benefits. And more broadly, there's most certainly benefits to anaerobic digestion and biomethane, which are going to be reliant on a digestate avenue, a reliable digestate avenue. Are there references? Well, we've certainly seen thriving anaerobic digestion industries overseas. So what's standing in our way? So the document outlines a range of key challenges that need to be overcome in Australia to enable the beneficial use of digestate, and really importantly, unlock the potential of anaerobic digestion and biogas in our bioenergy landscape. And so this, I think, is maybe the guts of the piece of work and where the real meat is. And there's certainly more commentary around each of these within the document. So the first one there is inconsistent legal and policy frameworks for digestate use. So fundamentally, at the moment, we lack a consistent policy and regulation to guide the management and use of digestate. We have some state-based regulations concerning biosolids and the management and reuse of organic waste, but most states are yet to provide a clear pathway for classifying the quality managed digestate as a product. And in fact, some states it's even classified as a priority waste, which really makes things challenging. So we need a clear pathway for classifying quality managed digestates as a product that are suitable for application to land. And following on from that is the regulatory uncertainty. So we need greater regulatory clarity, specifically the conditions for using digestate as a commercial product, and a risk-based framework to encourage and support its uptake. A lack of awareness and safety concerns. So I think end users and regulators probably at the moment are poorly informed about the benefits of digestate. And so coupled with ill-defined compliance obligations, it really makes it difficult for them to embrace the use of digestate. So a concerted information campaign to communicate the advantages of digestate is going to be really useful. The next two, haulage and spreading costs, is, I guess, probably an example of a market challenge associated with how a digestate supply chain may be set up to optimise transport and application cost. And similarly, commercial and competitive considerations is more in relation to competition with existing fertiliser markets. So now what? So linking this back to the circular economy, the developed world is moving towards circular economies, we know that, and countries and governments of every level are looking to reuse and recycle. Bioenergy will play a central role in creating a circular economy, and anaerobic digestion will be an increasingly important process for the supply of that bioenergy in the form of biogas. And we know that biomethane from anaerobic digestion has been identified in our roadmap to decarbonise the hard to abate natural gas network, and we know that there are some really ambitious targets there. And so, you know, if we're to come close to these targets, we'll need supportive policies and clear legal frameworks, as well as greater regulatory clarity and certainty about the management and use of digestate. Because without this, we're really up against it. The benefits are known, but more needs to be done to communicate these. And so finally, I'm really excited with the future of anaerobic digestion and biogas, and I think things are looking really well. I'm optimistic, but the sooner we do more with digestate, certainly the better it will be. So thank you very much. That's it from me, and I'll hand over to Mark from Helmont.
Thank you very much, Alistair. So, hi, Mark.
Hi, everyone. I'll try and share my screen. Hopefully I can do this relatively easily. Can you see that?
Yes, it's just on the full. You need to just pop it on live view. There we go. Perfect.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks, Alistair and Martin, for your presentations, and really pleased to see that we're having a conversation about some of the challenges associated with this industry. We certainly are optimistic that bioenergy more broadly has a pretty important role to play, but we do need to stare into some of those barriers that are currently facing the industry. So digestate, certainly one of them. And on the other end of the scale, I guess the more sexy end, as Alistair highlighted, is biogas or biomethane. So Helmont Energy, we were engaged by Bioenergy Australia to assess, I guess, whether there were specific barriers associated with the Australian Biogas Upgrading Specification. Bioenergy Australia and its members wanted to understand if there was an opportunity to remove some of those barriers based on what might be happening in international jurisdictions. So that's why we were engaged. A bit of background about ourselves. We've been working very closely with Renewable Gas Alliance, the subgroup of Bioenergy Australia, to support incentives to develop biomethane markets, as well as we've been part of a working group looking at gas injection. So we wouldn't say we're experts, but we've been close to the topic, and we've been drawing in on some experience that we've gained from work in other markets, particularly in our case in North America. So it's true that biomethane is growing exponentially in international markets. So we're seeing. So let's see, my slide will change. Yep. So in Australia, we're only now starting to identify the potential for biomethane to decarbonise our economy in hard-to-abate sectors. We were really pleased to see the release of the Bioenergy Roadmap commissioned by ARENA. It really just highlighted the opportunity for bioenergy across the sector, and specifically the call out on biomethane was fantastic, and it shows for us that there is a real opportunity here in Australia. If you look at what's happening overseas, the projects overseas are growing, and they're growing because barriers have been removed, and customers of biomethane are being incentivised to purchase that product. That's the two-pronged policy approach that's been adopted, and the results are clear. You just need to look at these charts, and when I flash these up, when we started our journey 2 years ago, we're looking at 100 PJs per annum of biomethane across the globe. Now we're looking at 185. So that's in the space of 2 years. So the market is here. It's just not here in Australia. So that's the challenge. In Australia, we're just starting this journey. So Gemini are pioneering the development of the Malabar project. The ARENA-funded project will demonstrate how we upgrade biogas. Gemini will use that biogas to offset some system use gas, and I learned recently that Core Gas will also consider using biomethane to produce renewable hydrogen. So a great example of how biomethane can be used to, number one, decarbonise our economy, or hard-to-abate emissions from the natural gas sector, but also how it can be used as a secondary product to produce green hydrogen. So that's fantastic. What Gemini are also doing is they're creating Australia's first tradable renewable gas certificate, and that provides consumers and producers a level of assurance that the biomethane is renewable, and ultimately what it does, it builds confidence, and with confidence we can create demand for the product and hopefully create a premium for the product, which will help support investment. So while this is a great development for our industry, it is just the tip of the iceberg, and industry and policy need to do a lot more heavy lifting to support a thriving biomethane industry here in Australia. And that includes removing barriers and continuing to incentivise gas users. The good news is if we get it right, we have the potential to decarbonise 40% of our gas grid based on, or the East Coast gas grid based on some of the numbers that we've seen. So one of those barriers is the upgrading specification for biomethane. Now, this specification allows producers to inject biomethane into third-party multi-user gas grids. And just so we are clear, today we can upgrade biomethane or upgrade biogas, and we can inject it in the grid. We can do it safely, we can be compliant, and there is technology that does exist to comply with the Australian standard, which is known as AS4564. What is less clear is whether the industry is incurring unnecessary costs to comply with AS4564, and also whether biomethane developers are protected by the same gas laws and gas rules that are afforded to the broader natural gas industry. So there's a few things happening in this space, and you've probably read and seen some consultation papers seeking to amend the gas laws. And at the end of the day, that's really designed about providing certainty and clarity to the industry around how biomethane and renewable gas participates in the legal framework of the gas system. Now, I should say that on behalf of Bioenergy Australia, we are incredibly grateful to the Future Fuel CRC for sharing their technical reports on biomethane injection. The Future Fuel CRC have been diligently conducting research on this topic for the last 4 years, and they've produced 10 studies covering gas injection here in Australia and abroad, and they're continuing their work. So a lot of the information that was deduced for the biomethane injection report has come from detailed technical assessments that were conducted by the Future Fuel CRC. So quick shout out to those guys. They're doing a great job supporting this industry. So to set the scene here in Australia, you've probably seen various different forms of this information. And the key message here is there's an enormous potential for bioenergy. 2,600 PJs of recurring bioenergy resources are available here. And from some prior work completed by Deloitte Access Economics, they identified 371 PJs of this resource could be converted into biomethane. Now that's a pretty big number based on our current domestic gas use. So we're using about 500 PJs per annum, and we're projected to use that, or a little bit less than that, out to 2040. Now that's gas that is, this is difficult gas to decarbonise unless we can introduce biogas or hydrogen into the gas system. Now, biomethane, it is produced from a variety of feedstocks ranging from ag residues, wastewater, biogas and landfill. Not all feedstocks are the same. So some feedstocks produce biogas that inherently contain impurities that are unique to biomethane. So a couple of examples, biogas from landfill and to a certain extent wastewater contains a lot of air. So that air needs to be removed. So there's oxygen, there's nitrogen, CO2 in that landfill gas. In addition, there are components called siloxanes, which are also available in landfill gas. On the flip side, agricultural-based biogas is free of siloxanes and relatively free of air, but it still contains sulfur, hydrogen sulfide, CO2, and some sources of ag-based biogas contain some free ammonia as well. So what we've learned is that the technology to upgrade this biogas is different, and it needs to be designed to be fit for purpose. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to upgrading biogas. So, and I do apologise for getting into some technical detail here. It was one of those tasks for us where it was difficult to stay at a high level because the issues sit in the detail, and I'm doing my best to try and keep it at a high level. So, but I know this will be a foreign language to a number of you on the call, and I might add it probably was to myself a couple of months ago as well. So AS4564, I've got a typo in that title. AS4564 establishes the technical guideline for injection and delivery of natural gas into our gas system. It was originally drafted from AG 864 in 2003. And the standard is overseen by AG10, the AG10 committee, which consists of industry bodies from the natural gas sector. Now, it's been revised 3 times, in 2005, 2011, 2010, 2020, largely in response to changing characteristics of our gas reserves and the upgrading of gas usage appliances. So as of today, the standard deals with natural gas derived from geological formations and specifically addresses impurities that are inherent in fossil-derived natural gas. Renewable gas, including biomethane and hydrogen, isn't captured specifically in the standard. Now that's not to say it can't be used. It just means that to upgrade it, we need to upgrade it to those limits that are contained in the standard. But that creates some risk for biomethane projects, and I'll explain them shortly. So the standard is sort of broken into 3 parts. Firstly, natural gas throughout the system, it needs to uniformly be able to tumble through the pipe. And as my esteemed colleagues highlighted to me, is that's measured in terms of heating value and Wobbe index. And by default, those values that are contained in this table require a certain concentration of hydrocarbons to inert gases. Inert gases being nitrogen and CO2. The second part of this table deals with oxygen levels and inert gases, and they're specifically called out. And oxygen, as an example, is a gas that causes corrosion, and that can present an operating and safety risk for gas participants. Now, the last part of the standard deals with impurities, and it covers limits on contaminants that are typically found in natural gas reservoirs and the processing equipment. So currently AS4564 works. It keeps our gas system safe and it provides certainty to gas users and producers. Unfortunately, it doesn't deal with renewable gases and some of the nuances associated with biomethane. So, those nuances, they include things like biomethane. It's injected at low pressures, generally at the distribution network. So that means that it doesn't undergo high compression. It's typically used by local consumers within that distribution network. And because it's injected at that level, a heavy blend of biomethane will make its way to some gas users. On the flip side, conventional natural gas is injected centrally upstream, and is, it has a lot more tolerance in terms of what it can handle in terms of deviation to this specification, because it can be easily blended through the vast quantities of natural gas injected into the system. Now, biomethane contains 7 impurities that are not captured by AS4564, and therein lies the issue that this industry potentially faces. Now, one of those contaminants is called siloxanes. It can reform into sand and glass in appliances, and while siloxanes get a fair bit of airtime here in Australia, they're not that prevalent here. They are prevalent in overseas markets, and they're caused by a very specific subset of industrial and cosmetic substances when they're disposed in landfills and wastewater systems. So they can damage burners, lead to corrosion, and impact the integrity of the system. So just so we're clear, we don't want siloxanes that form sand and glass in the gas system. But unfortunately, siloxanes can't be measured in real time. And to my knowledge, there is no technology that can completely eliminate siloxanes in biomethane. So low levels of siloxane, from our understanding of the information presented to us, can be injected safely into the gas system, as evidenced by projects overseas. And there are other impurities like VOCs and bacteria, which are common in biomethane, that can also be injected into the system safely. So the issue is this. So in order for us to comply with AS4564, those 7 impurities that are unique to biomethane, strictly speaking, should be removed, because the standard has a catch-all provision that inhibits the injection of any impurity that could cause damage or interfere with the gas system and appliances. So that presents a risk, and practically it means that pipeline operators have a discretion on whether to allow biomethane developers and producers to inject gas into those assets that are controlled by the operator. Now, whether real or perceived, these 7 contaminants are interpreted as impurities, and they can be interpreted as impurities that will damage the supply network and appliances. So while we've got great support from companies like Gemina and AGIG to inject gas into their system, as we inject more and more biomethane into the gas network, it will present an issue for industry because that biomethane will eventually find its way into third-party operated systems and appliances. And strictly speaking, if those impurities aren't removed, we may not be complying with the standard. So there is a simple solution, and it's to install more equipment and remove all those biomethane impurities below the minimum detectable level. And that's how an engineer would approach it. Unfortunately, economic reality means that if we were to do that, we wouldn't be building any projects. In fact, we may not be able to develop an industry if we had those sort of cost barriers in place for this sector. So what can we learn from our international counterparts and some of the standards? And Future Fuel CRC, they researched 13 different injection standards and guidelines across Europe and North America. And the key takeaways for us were interesting. So firstly, contaminants unique to biomethane were captured in some of these standards, but they weren't uniformly dealt with. And Alistair, I liked your discussion around taking a risk approach to digestate. What's been done in some of these markets is that a risk approach has been taken to injection as well. So sometimes feedstocks are risk assessed to determine what sort of technology would be fit for purpose to deal with impurities from that feedstock, and that reduces costs and complexity of projects. What was also interesting is that some feedstocks are prohibited from participating in the biomethane industry. So landfill gas is not allowed in 4 European countries, and in 1 European country, sewage gas isn't allowed. And it's not clear from the documentation why, but it would be plausible that the level of siloxanes in those markets, which are a lot higher than what they are here in Australia, could be reasons for landfill gas not being allowed in those jurisdictions. Now, that's not the case in North America, where landfill gas presents over 70% of the biomethane in that market. The one that we like is that the blending of off-spec biomethane is allowed in some jurisdictions. Now, what that means practically is that off-spec gas can be injected in the system so long as the first recipient of that blended gas has a gas mix that's consistent with the standard for gas injection and gas delivery. And by doing so, what that has done is it's encouraged a large number of smaller gas users or gas producers to participate in the biomethane industry. I guess I should also mention that the standards in those markets, they've evolved and been amended to include renewable gases like biomethane. So precedent had been set. To get into some of the technical detail, some technologies available to clean up gas include water wash, amine or chemical scrubbing, PSA, membrane cryogenic technologies, and the pie chart here is just a representation of what technologies are being used across Europe. What we find interesting is that water wash and chemical scrubbing is used more than 50% of the time, and that's great for these markets because that's a relatively cheap technology. But if we look at AS4564, we probably can't use those technologies here. So it's a good example of where our standard, it's a good example of how our standard's introducing a barrier, which is inhibiting us using some of the more competitive technologies in other markets. To meet AS4564, we are likely to need PSA or membrane cryogenic technology. and on the ground, what that practically means is that projects will be limited to large centralised facilities. Some of the largest landfills and wastewater treatment projects are likely to fall into that category. And unless we can develop agricultural hubs, we won't see too many agricultural projects participating in the biomethane sector. So where to from here? So the Future Fuel CRC, they've identified some new studies that can be implemented to quantify what the safe tolerance levels are to ensure that we have compliant gas that can be used in our appliances. Now, the results of those studies can be used to upgrade or used by Standards Australia and its committees to support amendments to AS 4564. Now, there is an alternative approach, and that is to emulate some of the work being done by Standards Australia and our friends over in the hydrogen groups. So they're looking to adopt an ISO hydrogen standard, which has been used overseas as a new Australian standard. Now, we could do something similar by adopting the biomethane quality standard from the European market. So there are other ways to do it. Ultimately, the intent of the study is being conducted by the Future Fuel CRC is to ensure there's a safe transition for biomethane injection in the Australian market. And to get into the specifics, the studies are looking at whether we can change the minimum allowable lobby index, meaning that we can reduce the heating value and potentially introduce some more inerts. Whether we could increase the oxygen levels from 0.2 to 1%, which are typical in some of those overseas jurisdictions. The effects of relaxing some of the total inert gas limits, the effects on terpene, which is a naturally occurring contaminant within biomethane, and it potentially masks some of the odorants used within our Australian gas system, like mercaptane. The effects of propane or LPG as a way to lift the heating value for biomethane, and of course the impact on setting limits for siloxanes, which are currently not addressed in the standard. So I guess to wrap up, we can see some opportunities to amend the standard here for natural gas, but to do so, we need to support organisations like the Future Fuel CRC to conduct the necessary research to ensure that any relaxation or any amendment is supported by the broader gas industry. We need to have the confidence of our gas market participants to support a thriving biogas or biomethane market. And I think on behalf of the members of Bioenergy Australia, we're certainly pleased to see some of the work being conducted by the Future Fuel CRC in supporting amendments for a standard that would support biomethane. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'd like to start off by saying thank you very much to all three of our speakers and for the effort you've put in. Great job, all of you. We're running just a little bit over, so we've got about 15 minutes for questions. We've probably got more questions in our list now than we have time for, but we'll see how we go, seeking fairly brief answers. And just as we turn to that, I thought I just would like to highlight to the audience how the presentations show Bioenergy working with its members and engaging GHD to work right from that high strategic level through to the details that Mark has just presented, because we do need efforts at all these different levels to grow our sector. So looking at our questions, Andre Lopez has asked, Moving away from industrial agriculture and intensive use of inputs, fertilisers, pesticides and herbicides is critical to align bioenergy with circular economy. Martin, how is that, or indeed Alistair, how is that addressed in the report? Mark, did you maybe want to stop sharing your screen too so we can panel it up? It's still showing. Oh, Lauren, sorry, you need to stop sharing. Okay. And
I thought I had unmuted there. I'm sorry.
I had a feeling.
We certainly touched on the mineral and chemical fertilizer or synthetic fertilizer issue in that digestate document, but being, the intent was for it to be a conversation starter and be a brief document. And so there was a limit to how much detail we could go into and how much we could present in it. But it was certainly highlighted as an opportunity. Obviously, the synthetic fertilizer industry is very well entrenched. It's very well supported. It's also very well, that they articulate the benefits of their products and how much to use very well. They've done a lot of work in that space, and so have various agricultural departments across the country, different soil types, different climate conditions, different crops. So there's a lot of work still to be done for digestate to catch up in that space. But the mineral fertilizers are getting very expensive currently. So there's a lot of focus coming onto alternatives now. And one of the things that's in the way is this lack of clarity around how digestate can be used and whether it's classified as a regulated controlled waste. It requires controlled-based transport and even the receiving facility, whether that needs to be licensed to receive controlled waste, which is a real complication when farmers want to get their hands on some of this stuff and they need to know how to use it, but the regulators haven't caught up.
Thank you for that answer. Next question is another one for Martin, which I'm happy to help back you up on this one, which is, have you considered or implemented already an economic comparative assessment of bioenergy vis-a-vis traditional energy sources in the Australian context? Sort of relates to the scope of your report or otherwise.
Yes, it was certainly considered, but the detail of that obviously is very situation dependent, and there are so many factors that come into it, as I touched on in my report, and so did Alistair. My presentation, I said Alistair. It's something that, there is a disparity currently, and that's what makes it so hard to get some bioenergy projects to stack up, because the value of renewable energy, there's not a price premium placed on that under our current regulatory and policy framework. And there is a premium paid for renewable natural gas in North America, for example. So, that makes a big difference to create that market pool. And then as far as the other things go, as far as the regulatory uncertainty around digestate, as an example, it's not just digestate, but digestate is a key one, where it's just not clear how much it's going to cost to manage digestate in any jurisdiction in the country at the moment.
Thank you, Martin. I think that answers it well. Alicia, the other thing I'd note in relation to your question is GHD does a lovely job in that diagram of highlighting the multiple different sources and processes associated with bioenergy, and those different processes are going to have their own cost profiles as well, and followed by a lot of those uncertainties Martin was just speaking to. Brooke Mackey has asked a question that's always good on panels. I feel like saying there is no one silver bullet here, but at the same time, I'll lead through with the question of what would be the one single thing you believe could really amplify bioenergy in its role in a lower carbon future in the Australian context. The author said, I see so much opportunity, where to start? Now, I'm going to get each one of you perhaps to just touch on that from the work. I might actually start with Mark, and then I'll roll back round to you, Martin.
Thanks, Tiana. I didn't have my listening ears on, so let me just Let me look.
I can repeat it if you like.
No, I think I got it.
Got it.
So the single thing you believe could amplify bioenergy in its role. Okay. So one thing. Well, that's interesting. So incentives. So we need a market. Without a market, if people don't want to buy the product, we've got no need to remove barriers, and we only need to look to UK or Europe or North America to see what's happened in that market, and it's all been designed to encourage consumers to buy the product, whether that's through CNG for vehicles, supported through the Renewable Fuel Standard or the LCFS, or through regulatory mandates for pipeline operators where gas targets have been set, or green gas targets have been set, through to renewable heat incentives for gas users in the UK who receive a credit for buying biomethane. Like, all of those things are designed to create demand for the product. And if there's demand, the market will sort itself out and work out how to reduce costs by removing barriers, and find investment. So.
Thanks, Mark. Alistair or Martin, would you like to?
Yeah, I can go. Look, following on from Mark, I think that's the key thing for me, and is this digestate piece. And I know someone, when I was being optimistic at the end of my presentation there, saying how excited and I was about the future, because I am. But that's notwithstanding, there's some serious challenges, and the number one challenge, and particularly where I am in Victoria, is digestate, and having a supportive policy and regulatory position in relation to digestate. So I think that just has to be where we start. I think we're a lot further down the line in sort of Mark's topic. But I think we can keep going further down that line. But if we're still stuck where we are with the sort of policy vacuum in relation to digestate, we won't be going very far.
Thank you, Alistair. I agree. I've lost the actual question now, but someone had specifically noted in the questions around Victoria having anaerobic digestates regulated as reportable priority wastes as a blanket situation, and what's being done about that.
It's in the answered box. I put a little response in there. I didn't realise it would disappear when I did that, but yeah, I completely understand, and you've summed it up, Tiana, that Victoria is in a really challenging situation right now. But I know, I'm sure she won't mind giving her a plug, but I know Stephanie at Yarra Valley is doing some awesome work, but she's been a bit of a lone voice, perhaps. So
that's Alistair, where I'll jump in, which is where Bioenergy Australia has an anaerobic digestate working group now, and we have a risk management framework that sort of connects with the type of diagram you have around how to approach an end of waste framework for anaerobic digestate from different sources. And we're keen to draw in our members to fill in the technical aspects of that. And also over in the comments section, I can see that Brian Cox from Bioenergy New Zealand has also been observing the work that they've done, and Bioenergy Australia is seeking to work closely with Bioenergy New Zealand around that, so that we keep building on that knowledge that is there, which there have been some other comments around, can we learn from other jurisdictions? And, the short answer there has got to be, yes, we can.
So just on that, Tiana, there was some content on that in the document as well. So yeah, it was certainly, we mentioned the New Zealand guideline, and yeah, certainly a very useful reference.
Thank you, Martin. We have indeed. Now that you're up on the screen there, I'm going to just actually roll back round to that question of is there one thing you would like to see as well? Okay.
Well, the government did something very good recently and launched the National Soil Strategy, and then there was a Food Waste for Healthy Soils funding program and some updates of standards. There's a national waste policy and a national waste action plan. we've got now a bioenergy roadmap, but we don't have a bioenergy action plan. And I think that could really make a difference, where the targets are actually going beyond just some stretch goals, to actually say what's going to be done, what are we going to do, what are we going to get done.
Thank you, Martin. Good suggestion. Okay, we've got lots of questions here. I'm just trying to roll through to one that maybe is a little bit different here. We've got quite a few around digestates. I'd just note for the audience, given we're going to be short on time relative to questions, so some of the reports will answer some of these questions themselves, and please reach into the speakers or Bioenergy Australia, and we'll keep answering these questions beyond that. And sorry, just lots of noise outside my office for a moment. My hands flying. So this is an interesting one. I think this connects into the national report, but there's a question from Steve Budden. Has someone done a mass balance for how much biomaterial is required for 23% of natural gas generation as biomethane? Germany, with a large population and developed biogas, achieves 13% biomethane. Does anyone want to talk about the scale of biomass opportunity in Australia?
We can grow a lot more, but we need to have a reason to. And that's the supply chain linkages. The infrastructure network is still yet to be joined up within Australia, because the policy settings aren't really all that supportive yet for investment certainty. So there's, we've made good headway. There's some really good examples of what can be done, but the projects that exist already are the ones that have fitted that particular context. And the proponents have done the hard yards to get their project over the line and get it built and operating. And some are still going, enduring the pain of digestate regulation uncertainty, and trying to sell a product that the regulators haven't caught up with. But they also probably need to do some more work around characterising their product as well, and providing some guidance on how it's best used. And all that takes more than a single proponent can generally cover. So I think there's a lot of potential, and we can grow a lot more biomass, but we need to have that market pull for that to happen as well.
Thank you, Martin. And for our audience, I'd suggest reading into the reports that we're releasing today, as well as the roadmap as well, for some of the information on volumes. Thank you for that. And Brandon Bloom has one that's got a two-part question. I feel like you've all answered part of it already, but from a bioenergy perspective, what are the key learnings from overseas that we could draw on in Australia? Are there any fundamental technical or market differences, other than policy and regulations, that could make it harder for these projects to be successful in Australia compared to overseas? And Mark, Martin, you might both want to have a shot at answering that.
Alistair, you might be answering that in your presentation at Australian Water. Coming up.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alistair.
No, that's all right. I think, yeah, look, again, from a digestate perspective, and it's hard to move away from policy and regulation, but because that's the underpinning feature of success in some of these overseas jurisdictions. I think an interesting discussion or consideration relates to the UK. The UK framework, which really is underpinned by that by the animal byproducts regulation. So I think there's an interesting piece at looking at how relevant some of those things are,
or aren't,
or are not exactly in Australia. So yeah, I think there's a multitude of really relevant, successful examples from Denmark, from the UK, from Germany.
And then on the value of biogas, there's like North America, it's not unusual for renewable natural gas to be fetching $28 to $30 a gigajoule in that market. And in Australia, we're down around $10 a gigajoule for natural gas, give or take a few dollars in whichever state you're in, and the scale of consumer contract. But that's a big disparity. And our ACCUs system, the carbon credits system in Australia, doesn't yet have all the boxes ticked in terms of pathways for creating and claiming carbon credits, generating carbon credits from bioenergy. So there's more that can be done to really help to align the economic factors.
Thank you, Martin. And then Mark, I'll finish off with a fairly specific question, which is from Andrew Johnston. Has there been an investigation into the presence of the 7 biogas contaminants in natural gas? Point being that if they're not in the standard, perhaps some of these constituents are already present in fossil natural gas?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's come up from time to time in various conversations with gas producers and pipeline operators that in practice some of these impurities may already be present in the gas and being blended through. Now that's all anecdotal. I'm not aware of any specific study that has been done to measure whether those impurities are in the gas. But it would be really interesting to do so, because I think that we'll sort of set some limits at the very least on what we can and can't inject based on how the system's going to be running.
Thank you. So sounds like it might be worth investigating further. I would like to, it's always the thing of our online audience that you can't all get a clap from the whole audience online, but I'd like to thank our 3 speakers for their efforts and answering all the questions. Thank you so much. It's been a really interesting afternoon, and everyone, these reports are being launched, so look out for them through the normal channels, and we look forward to working with you to make sure that these reach their intended audiences to the fullest extent. So thank you all thank you to all of those online for listening and showing interest in what we're doing, and please feel welcome to engage with Bioenergy Australia about any of this work.